As we've been studying about the attributes of God, I've enjoyed this study as we've been doing it, and we've talked about the fact that God is holy, God is love, God is forgiving, God is just. But tonight we're going to talk about wisdom. We're going to talk about the fact that God is wise, and the fact that everything that we have and all the wisdom and knowledge and everything that we get comes from Him. And I was, as I was studying, and you look around, in today's time, right now, there is more information available to you than in any other time. I remember, now my grandmother, I remember she was probably around 90 at the time. She was born in 1911, and I used to, after my grandfather had died, I would go down and pick her up sometimes on during the week if she had a doctor's appointment or something like that. And it was when Mallory was still young, and I was taking her down to the babysitters, and I would go down, and as I'd come back, I would pick my grandmother up and bring her up to Johnson City so that she could go to her doctor's appointments. Then my dad would take her back later. And we had some time to kill. I'd picked her up and got to work about 8 o'clock, and her appointment wasn't until like 9:30. So she was there at the office, and she was, and so this has been probably 15 to 20 years ago, and she was, well, not 20, probably 15, 10 to 15 years, and she was sitting there, and we got to talking, and we were talking about technology and how much technology had changed in her lifetime. And do you realize that somebody that was born around the 1st of 1900 saw more technological change than in all other time period before? They went from the Model T to men walking on the moon. They saw from that. She remembered, and that's what she would tell me about when she was a young girl, remembering seeing her first car. Now, nobody else here can remember seeing their first car, because we were at cars from the beginning. But she remembered seeing the first car that ever was around her area, that ever came around her house. And we talked about that and the difference in technology. And I sat down at the computer, and I said, and this was actually before Google had became so big, and I think I was probably using Yahoo at the time. And I said, what would you like to know? And she said some question, and I typed it in and waited, and we were still on dial-up and had to wait, maybe 15, 20 seconds to get an answer. And she was just absolutely amazed, just completely amazed at what she was seeing. And now with Google and with high-speed internet and with all the things today, you can find out anything you want just like that. I mean, most of the times when you do a search on the internet and you go to Google, it brings you back, not only it'll bring you back 2.5 million results, but it'll tell you how fast it did it, and it'll be like 0.3 seconds. It found your results in 0.3 seconds a lot of times. And in 0.3 seconds, you can find out just about anything you want to know. The other day, we were, I hate to tell my cheats, but when I'm smoking, I cheat. I go on to Charbroil's website, brisket. How long do I smoke it? Now, I use the thermometer, but just to get an idea of when I need to put it in so that it'll be ready in time. It gives you an idea. 12 to 14 hours, and it knows that, and you can find it out just like that. You can go to anything. You can. Christy had told me I was going to start going to her dentist, And she had told me about them, and I broke a tooth, and I tried to call her, and she wouldn't answer her phone, and which is pretty typical. And I couldn't get a hold of her, so I go on Google, and I knew where they were at. She had told me where they were at, and I typed in dentist on Knob Creek Road. I had the answer. I had their phone number, just like that. And it's that way with just about anything that you want to find out. And so many times you get so much more information than you want. You have to go in and narrow it down sometimes to get less information, because knowledge is so readily available to us that we can just get it at any time. But what about wisdom? If you go on to if you go in there and ask it about wisdom, you type in Google wisdom, or how do I get wisdom, you're going to find 2.5 million pages on what wisdom is or different things, but nothing can really tell you how to get wisdom. Now, there's a lot of different analogies and a lot of different sayings about wisdom. One of the ones I've always used was, knowledge is knowing something, knowledge is information, wisdom is knowing how to use that information. I heard one today, and it was so appropriate. I was looked on Facebook this morning, and I saw this, and I thought, I have got to use this. It said that knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. But philosophy is making the point that ketchup is a smoothie. So there's a big difference there. But yeah, I mean, tomato is technically a fruit, but I would not want it in my fruit salad. And that's wisdom. And I used to say that, we used to think that wisdom was the same as common sense, but it's really not, and we're going to get into what it actually is. And so when we talk about wisdom, there's one place in the Bible that we just about always go to, and that is Proverbs. Let's go to the book of Proverbs, and we'll be in chapter 2. Verse 1 says, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield for those who walk uprightly." Now, as we look at this, we see where knowledge and wisdom comes from. Believe it or not, even though you can find out most anything you want on Google, knowledge does not come from Google. Okay? It comes from God. Understanding comes from God. Wisdom comes from God. We all know the story. We remember the story of Solomon, and why, Solomon was started out as a good king. He started out as a very godly man. They went up to offer sacrifice, and Solomon just took so much more, an abundance of sacrifice, more than what he was supposed to take, more than what he was required to take. And he wanted to just find favor with God. And we know that God said, "Okay, Solomon, of all the things, what do you want? You have served me so far. You have been good. You show that you are going to be a godly man. What would you like for me to do for you?" And we all know what we might do. I mean, let's face it. If God asked you that question, people would be looking at it like the genie, okay? This is like a genie coming out of the bottle. I get one wish, okay? I get one wish from God. Give me long life. Give me millions of dollars. Give me all the money in the world. Give me all, and we've all heard all kinds of jokes about people that's found the genie and all these different things, and I remember seeing the movie Aladdin and having the 3 wishes. Basically, though, Solomon got the genie in the bottle with this. God said, whatever you want, what do you want? And because Solomon made his plea for wisdom, it was one of the most unselfish things that anybody's ever asked for. Solomon did not ask for wisdom so that he could increase his power. He didn't ask for wisdom so that he could increase his money. Okay? Now we know that if you have wisdom, you can increase your money. You can increase your power. You can increase what you can do. But that's not what Solomon wanted it for. He wanted wisdom so that he could serve the Lord better. Now think about it. God said, or God put Solomon in charge of God's people. I mean, the people of Israel was God's people. And here is Solomon. He says, I am young, I'm dumb, I don't know what I'm doing, and here I am, I'm in charge of your people, and I do not want to make a mistake with your people. And since I am over your people, and I am leading your people, I need your wisdom, I need your guidance in order to show me how to do it better. I need your wisdom in order to lead your people and make the right decisions for your people. It was so unselfish. And because of that, then we know that God gave Solomon all kinds of money and power, and he lived in peace all of his life. But it was because of his quest for wisdom. And God also gave him wisdom so that he is the wisest person that's ever been known. Now, as we look at the wisdom of Solomon, and you read the Proverbs, and you read the account, the one that I always think of, and the one that he brings up was where the two women had the 2 babies, and one baby died, the other one claimed it, and we see that Solomon said, well, let's just cut the baby in half and give half to this one, half to this one. And in today's time we read that and think, that sounds so ridiculous. Why would anybody make that suggestion, and why would anybody go for that suggestion? Well, that we think that because we've heard it thousands of times. That's because this story has been passed down for many, many centuries. It had never been thought of before that time. So when you read the Proverbs, and you read some of the different Proverbs or the different excerpts of wisdom, and we think that's common knowledge. But 4,000 years ago, it wasn't. It wasn't common knowledge. It wasn't something that people understood at that time. That wisdom had to be passed down from somewhere. Most of the wisdom that we have today, most of the wisdom that most of us have, or most of what we consider wisdom, is something that somebody has passed down to us. There's a lot of my knowledge that I have gained from either my mother or my father or my grandparents, but it's been passed down. Nobody passed all these Proverbs down to Solomon. This was all wisdom that God gave to Solomon. It was all his, and that's why he was the first to come up with all these Proverbs. The book of Ecclesiastes is just a book of wisdom, and think about, it starts out that everything in the world has a purpose. Every time in the world has a purpose. And every purpose has a time. And that's something that nobody had ever thought of. People read the book of Ecclesiastes and say, well, he got that from the Beatles. You know? No, I think it was the other way around. Solomon came up with it first. The fact that everything that we do and everything that we work for in our life, other than serving God, is vanity. We know that. I've heard that my whole life. I've read that. But it came from Solomon. It came from wisdom that God passed down so that we could understand it. Now, the wisdom only comes from God. It's not the same thing as common sense. Good old horse sense. We've all heard talked about, good old common sense, good old horse sense. Something that, we've all known somebody that didn't seem like they were smart as a tack. I mean, you give them a book and they could tell you, they could do any math equation, but they couldn't figure out how to get home if you set them out, a mile from house. I mean, I've known people like that, and you all have too. People that just can't figure out how to do anything, but they're smart when it comes to books or different things. So we know that knowledge and wisdom, there is a big or knowledge and common sense. You can be smart without having the common sense. So a lot of people consider wisdom as common sense. No, common sense, just in the definition itself, is common. Okay? It's common sense. It's what most of us should have. Some people have more of it than others. Some people don't seem to have what's common to everybody else. But it is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom is divine. Wisdom is a sense or a amount of knowledge, how to use that knowledge, but it only comes from God. It's so much more. It's so much further than common sense will take you. You see somebody that it seems like they've just got a lot more common sense than anybody else. Well, that right there tells you it's not common. Common means everybody's got it. Okay? When you see somebody that seems so much smarter than what common sense is, that's because they've got wisdom. They are divinely given that. Now, as we look in chapter 2 there, it says that God wants to impart His wisdom to us. And in doing so, we have to, in order to get the wisdom, we have to ask the right person. Verse 6 tells us that the Lord gives the wisdom. Like I said, we learn a lot of stuff from other people. We learn a lot of stuff from our parents. But all wisdom, the Lord gives wisdom, and from His mouth comes knowledge. I don't care how much you read, and I've known people that they have studied, and they have studied so much more than everybody else, and they still just can't get it. Have you known people like that? They just don't get it. They struggle with it, and I've known people like that, and you feel for people like that. It's not necessarily what you're born with. Some people do have a broader grasp of things, but listen, if you want wisdom, it has to come from God. Now, James tells us, if you want wisdom, ask God for it. Ask Him for it. So many people go through life and they go through life lacking wisdom, and they struggle with everything in their life, and they never stop and say, God, I need your help. I need wisdom in this case. But we see here that it only comes from God. You can't earn it on your own. You can't get it on your own. It comes through Him. Then you have to have the right attitude. So that in verse 2, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. You have to want it. So, it's not something you deserve. It's not something that you should be able to work to obtain. It's not something. It's funny that the best things in life, and I work for a lot of things, and we gain a lot of things through our work. But the best things in life are gifts of God. They're things that you don't have to work for. They're things that you don't have to earn. Wisdom is one of those things that we don't have to earn. We don't, and you try telling a college student or a high school student that, but that's a different type of knowledge. This knowledge and this wisdom comes only from God. And you've got to turn your heart to Him. You gain wisdom pretty much the same way you do with salvation. You've got to seek it with your heart. You've got to incline your ear to it. It means you've got to reach out to God and ask Him and have a desire for it, and have the attitude that I know I'm not deserving of it. It's something that I want from you. It's something that only you can give. And then in verse 3 and 4 it says, use the right tools. And in 3 and 4, cry out for discernment. Lift up your voice for understanding. And then it says to seek her, talking about wisdom, seek her as silver, or search for her as hidden treasure. Listen, most of us, we want silver. And when it talks about searching for it as silver, it's talking about goods, money, monetary. It's talking about things that sustain us. It's talking about things that we obtain, hidden treasures. We need to seek after wisdom with that much enthusiasm. I mean, there's an ongoing thing out in the West, and there are people from all over the world have come because this one man says that he has buried or hidden somewhere, I think it's like $1 million he's buried or hidden. And he sent out these little maps or all these clues. And there's books on it. And there's thousands of people each year are tromping all through the Midwest because they think that's where the clues lead. And there's people looking in California, there's people looking in Montana, there's people looking in Wyoming, but they don't know exactly where the thing is their wisdom, they don't know where to start, or with their treasure, they don't know exactly where his starting point is. And there's people who've been looking for it for years, and he never told anybody where it was, but he gave out all these clues. And people are just pouring in there all the time, and it's been ongoing for a long time, for years, and they can't find it. But they're searching, and people's giving up their vacations. There are people out there still looking today that have quit their jobs to go look for this treasure because they think that they're able to find it. I remember growing up as a kid, some of the movies. I remember Indiana Jones movies. He's looking for these treasures, these archaeological treasures, and it was so adventuresome. And I remember watching them. We search for things like that. People will, and you may not be out searching for gold or searching for silver, but the idea is that the things that we would treasure the most is what he's making the point here. The things that your heart would desire the most, you would search for it. You should search for wisdom. You should have a desire for wisdom as much as you do for money. You should have a desire for wisdom as much as you do for anything else in this life. We need to have that desire for wisdom, because wisdom, it sets us apart. Because a wise person knows God. I was listening to James Merritt Sunday morning, and he was talking about atheists. And one thing he said about an atheist is the only thing that God says in the Bible about atheists. If you read the Bible, there's very little about atheists. But it says the person that says there is no God is a fool. I mean, it's plain and simple. That's really the only thing that the Bible says about an atheist is they're a fool. And for the person who says there is no God. So wisdom brings a knowledge of God, and it's kind of a full circle. In order to gain wisdom, you've got to ask God for it. You've got to have a faith in God. You've got to have a belief in God, and you've got to have a relationship with God and desire God, and then you gain the wisdom, and the wisdom gives you the knowledge of God. You can't be wise and say there's no God. You might have common sense, you might have Google knowledge, but you don't have wisdom if you don't believe in God. You can't say that you've got wisdom. Down to chapter 3 in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. I'm one of those kind of people that I've been pretty blessed. And throughout school, I didn't have to study a whole lot. And I was able to get by really well in school by not studying, at least through high school. When I got to college, it became a lot harder. But I still didn't study as much as a lot of people, and I was pretty blessed. And I could probably make it through life without studying anything anymore. And I could probably get by with things if I would just lean on my own understanding. But that's all I would do. Because when I look back, and this was kind of one of those things, I went back when I applied to for a teacher's license. I had to get my transcripts from high school and my college transcripts, and I had to send those in to the state. And then later, when I applied to Liberty University for my seminary, I had to send them those transcripts. And as I pulled those transcripts and I looked at my transcripts, I realized that by relying on what I knew, I just barely got by. I mean, that's it. I just barely got by. You could go back to my high school. I did not excel. I didn't, nobody would say that he was. I got kicked out of some of the accelerated classes because I wouldn't study. They would put me in all these accelerated classes, and then they'd turn around and kick me out of them because they found out that I was just going to do what I needed to get by. And that's what I did in high school. Just relied on what I already had in my head and what the teacher taught, and that's all I did. And so many people try to do that, and I could probably skate by through life and just get by. But have wisdom, and in order to excel, and in order to God to use me, He's not going to what I do. If I'm just going to rely on my own understanding, and I'm not going to study, and I'm just going to be lazy about it, and I'm just going to use what I've already got, and that's it, God's not going to use me, and God's not going to bless me, and He's not going to give me more wisdom. I mean, why would He? If I'm going to abuse it and I'm not going to use it, why would He give me more? So I can't just rely on my own understanding. I can't just rely on what I can figure out, because I have to acknowledge Him in all my ways. I've got to rely on Him. I've got to wait on His timing. See, that's one of the things that when you rely on your own understanding, you want things to happen now. You don't realize that it's got to be in God's time. You don't understand that we have that His wisdom, that He is all-knowing, and that He sees what's going to happen next, and He sees our whole life from beginning to end, and we don't understand that. And if you rely on your own understanding, you will make so many more mistakes, and you will fail so many times in life by relying only on yourself. That's why it says to acknowledge God, trust in Him with all your heart, and rely on His understanding. Acknowledge Him. And when we do that, then we will realize that it's all about that He wants what's best for you. And ask Him for that wisdom, realizing that He knows everything. That's the main thing that so many people don't be wise in your own eyes. That's verse 7. It says, don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. When we try to be wise in our own eyes, that means that I think more highly of myself than I am. I feel like that I can do it on my own. I feel like that my wisdom is sufficient, that my knowledge is sufficient, and I can handle it all on my own. And that is not acknowledging that God knows everything. Now, I'm an optimist. I'm a very optimistic person. And if I were, I could say that through my wisdom I could do anything. But the truth is I can't. The truth is it don't matter how optimistic I am about myself. God still knows more than I do, and I can't even compare. There is no way that I could ever say and that I've arrived. You ever know anybody that had that idea? They've gotten a degree, or they've read the Bible through so many times, or they've studied. And I've known some pastors that had they never really said it, but they had the air about them, or the attitude that they've arrived. Basically, I know it all. I've been doing this, and you bring up something to them, and they'll tell you right off how many years they've done it and how much they've seen, and they know how every situation is supposed to be handled. I've known pastors that have said that, and that's a dangerous, very dangerous place to be. Now, I've seen a lot of situations, and I've seen a lot of different things happen in my ministry, and I've seen a lot of different things happen in different churches. But to say that I know how to handle all the situations because I've seen it all, and I could name names of some pastors that'll tell you that they've been pastoring for 50 years and that they've seen it all. That is relying on your own wisdom. That is, you've not seen it all. You don't know it all. Only God knows it all. You might know a lot. You might have seen a lot of things. But a lot of things might have changed since you've seen all of it too. A lot of situations, and you may want to, if you want to handle things in your way, and you want to rely on your own wisdom, then you'll take this situation that has just arose, has just come up, and this situation within your church, and this situation, this problem that you see between these two people, and you might go back in your mind and say, well, these two people had a similar situation, so I'm going to handle this one the same way I handled that one. Well, guess what? These two people ain't these two people. And handling them the same way you handle them may not be the right way. But when we rely on our own wisdom, that's what happens. That's why we rely on God's wisdom, because He knows what's in the heart of these people. We don't. And we handle every situation has to be handled differently, and therefore God's wisdom has to. And we need to learn to ask Him about every situation Everything that we do. God, what do you, how should I handle this? How should I do this transaction? How should I handle these people? How should I handle this situation? There's nothing too big or too small to ask God about. When Christy and I built our house, we found the lot where we live. We found it. A friend of ours told us about this guy that was selling this lot, and we went by. We liked it. We looked at it. I looked at it, and we had a plan of a house that we'd looked at and thought, well, we could build this. This would go here. Everything we thought about it, and then I turned around and I called my dad. And I brought him out there. I didn't need his permission. I didn't need him to tell me, I had already figured it out, but I just wanted to ask him his opinion. He had seen more pieces of property. He had bought more land than I had. He had done more building than I had at that point, and so I just wanted to ask him. I wanted to ask his advice. But yet we go through life, and when we have decisions to make and we have things pop up in our life, we decide we're going to handle it on our own when we've got the God that has created it all at our disposal, and we should ask him, what is your plan? What do you think about this? How would you, or how should I handle this, and that will be pleasing to you? And that's how we have to handle just about everything that comes up. I talked earlier about Solomon's prayer for wisdom. When we talk about Solomon's prayer for wisdom, that is a prayer that I have prayed myself many times. Many times in the past year, I have prayed that. God, these are your people. The people at Greenwood Baptist, this is your people that I have the pleasure of leading, and I need your wisdom. And I have prayed that same prayer. I've went to the Scripture and prayed it from Scripture, read it through Scripture as a prayer to God, because in order to do this job, I can't rely on my own understanding. I can't rely on my own wisdom. It has to come from God. But not only do I need to be doing that, but you need to be doing that. Everybody needs to do that in our lives daily. We can't rely on the wisdom that we prayed for yesterday. I think that wisdom is something that we need to be praying for continually. It's something that we need to, God, get up in the morning. God, give me the wisdom that I need to get through today. Because all wisdom, all knowledge comes from God. Has anybody got anything else tonight?